Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the program. My name is Noman, and I welcome you to this live digital supply chain webinar, Finding Comfort in Ambiguity, Implementing Digital Supply Chain in Startups. I welcome our guest speakers in this program as well. We have Amy Paulson and Govin. So there's something intriguing about launching a startup that is very interesting. Even the road to success is often bumpy and full of surprises. Implementing digital supply chain in automotive startup is very similar. And today we're talking to two of the experienced professionals in this space, Amy Paulson and Govin. So let me introduce Amy and Govin a little bit here. So Amy has been solving logistic problems in electric vehicle industry for the last 10 years. Her early career experience in law and law enforcement facilities facilitates the kind of comprehensive planning and execution needed to develop new market channels and maximize revenue for new product launches. Her professional niche in designing logistic pathways and process that meets foreign and domestic regulatory requirements while opening some of the world's most restrictive markets to the American innovation. She's a former Secret Service special agent. I did not know that, get to know this fact from Amy. So, and she's also a litigator. She has managed complex global logistics and new market entry for Caterpillar, Tesla, and Rivian Automotive. She holds a doctorate JD from Loyola, New Orleans, and MBA from Illinois State. Welcome, Amy. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me today.
Very good. Thank you. Our next panelist is Govin. And Govin and me, we have gone a long way back at FCA. We've worked together. Govin manages logistics for startup vehicle manufacturer NIO, where he is the head of logistics operations. And his work includes product R&D, vehicle imports, logistics planning, and launch while supporting processes and best practices globally. He has more than 20 years of experience in designing, implementing, and optimizing production, logistics, and supply chain operations for companies including FCA, Tesla, and NIO. He has specialization in world-class manufacturing and logistics, and he has extensive background in lean manufacturing and digital technologies. Welcome, Govin. How are you today?
Good morning, Norman. Good morning, Amy. Good morning, everybody. Yes, I'm excited to be here and looking forward to this webinar.
Very good. So as we start this program, Amy, do you want to say something to kick us off as we are starting this program?
In terms of introduction or
yeah.
Content or? Okay. Yeah. So I guess a little bit of context to how I'm going to kick this off today is as Noman mentioned, I've launched new supply chain initiatives, new logistics initiatives. Now this is Rivian is my fourth company doing this, so I think I've found my niche. And there are certain threads that have run through each of the 4 instances that I thought would be good to maybe talk a little bit about to kick us off today. And when we look at starting a new supply chain or logistics initiative, ambiguity is a theme that a thread of or a theme that runs through at least all of my experiences. And ambiguity is maybe in some ways the enemy of digital supply chain, but it's also an opportunity. And I wanted to talk about that specifically in 3 areas. And the first is people. The people requirements are different between an incumbent automotive organization and a fresh or startup supply chain organization. And the way in which we look at people from that perspective is that your leadership style is different for one. And by that, I mean that I call it, the way I look at it is you may be a little bit more of a maverick in your leadership approach, in that you're not afraid to take decisions or make difficult calls in a way that you wouldn't maybe feel comfortable in an incumbent organization. Also on the people front, your skill set is going to be a little bit different, and specifically your soft skills. So relationship building, networking, gaining consensus, influencing folks to come to your point of view, and to solve problems together becomes very important, much more so than if you're more of a siloed operation. Your organization structure, I think we'll touch on this a little bit later, is definitely much more of a matrix. It's flat, it's less hierarchical. And then finally, your network becomes critically important. You can't solve all the problems yourself. You're going to need help, you're going to need advice, you're going to need to learn. So the network from the people perspective becomes very important. The next is process. And so from process, I mean, your process evolution is, the velocity is much faster in a startup. But there are some things that you have to watch out for, and some decisions and trade-offs that have to be negotiated. And by that, I mean, so flexibility. When you're in a startup organization, flexibility is very important to execution of your operations. But flexibility and process sometimes there's a tension or a pull between the two, and that process can slow down your flexibility and also your velocity. You have to negotiate a good balance there. And also your process should be, in a startup, it's going to be much more cross-functional in nature. It's going to touch more areas of the business, which was really something that I embraced early on in my experience at Tesla. I hadn't been exposed to that before. And that's a whole new world of learning about not just how supply chain and logistics work, but how automotive companies as a whole work. And then the last one, which I think we're going to focus on today, is technology. And this is a very rich space, especially in a startup environment. You're basically starting with a clean sheet, and that's got positives and negatives to it, which I think we're going to dive into in a lot of detail here today. But maybe a good way to think of it, Govind, now's a good time to go to the next slide, is talk about how we iterate in technology in a startup space. And I like to call it crawl, then you walk, and then you run. And crawl is, okay, I've got myself, maybe a couple of other logistics folks. We see the plan in the future for this automotive startup, but how do we make things move? How do we make things happen? And you really start with very basic tools, because a lot of your decision making in the technology space is yet to come. So we start here with, maybe it's an Excel sheet on how you execute a shipment or execute an order to a supplier. You start out with very basic tools. And then you look ahead and you keep the end state in mind as you begin to iterate. So then, you grow your team, you grow your experience set, you grow your skills, and then you get to the walk stage. And in the walk stage, you've got a little bit of automation. You have maybe some off-the-shelf tools, or you've developed something in-house. Whether you buy off the shelf in a black box or develop yourself, there's sort of a constant tension there in the startup as well that Govind and I can talk about in a little bit more detail. But you've got a little bit of automation, you've got more visibility, which begins to help you plan against disruption, but really you're not in the final stage. And to really protect yourself, really optimize your operations, you have to get to the run stage in supply chain logistics planning and execution. And that's where you're using purchase data, publicly available data, your own data, which maybe you now have and you didn't have when you started. And you're building a picture of what your supply chain and your logistics planning looks like. And you're able to share that within the organization and then with your supply base and your vendor base to really start to develop a comprehensive picture of how you're going to manage the business.
Very, very nice, Amy. So this gave us a good idea of what we're going to talk about here. So in this space, let me stop sharing here and so that people can see us as well. Now, in this space, especially the digital supply chain and the startup space, there are when you're in this space, there are a lot of risk, there are a lot of surprises, sometimes chaotic, like you're saying, Amy. My question is, how do you find comfort in this ambiguity? What is the recipe to be successful in the startup space? So maybe we can start with Govin here. Govin, what in your experience, and then I like to come back to Amy on this point, because this is something very interesting for me. And I like to hear from Govin that what do you think about this startup space, the number of companies that you worked with, and how do you find comfort in this space?
Thank you, Norman. I think there was a great introduction from Amy when she introduced how digital supply chain or how a startup logistics is actually perceived and created. And I really like the analogy of crawl, then walk, and then run. I think that is perfect. I think you had a couple of questions in there that you asked. I think the first one you asked was, I think, system. So, just going to give you some high-level answers here from based on my opinion and based on what I have learned so far in the industry. As a startup, you have only thing, many times what we have is we start with the vision. We start with the technology, we start with the goal that we have. And so what we need to do is take the vision and understand, do our research and understand, like I think Amy said, is how technologically advanced or technologically opportune logistic and supply chains to have implemented. And that doesn't mean you can just buy it out of the like a black box, or you can have it developed. And some of it comes through iterative methods and iterative process. So what you need to do is once you have an overall logistic vision and mission, you take it and break it down into granular level objectives that you can actually chew and you can actually manage each one of them. And then you develop stretch goals based on those granular objectives. What your stretch goals need to be. In what I can use an example. Stretch goal is, these are the technologies that's available for me in terms of you break down your inbound, outbound, factory logistics, or warehouse, or even how you move your purchase parts, right? And you challenge yourself saying, how do I make it better? This is the average industry efficiency. And what do you do in terms of increasing it by a notch, couple of notches, go about it. And then also you have to look at what kind of technologies do you need to help you become more productive and more efficient. This is not like out of the box solution. This is something you learn and you see, you watch, you observe, and you talk to partners and collaborators that help you with that. And the key thing is learn from your mistakes and missteps, but improve faster. The next iterative process that you have as you learn from your mistake, it should be faster and quicker. You always, so when you fall, and you make mistakes, when you fall, you make sure you fall forward What that means, you have some learning that you learn from that fall, and you improve for the better. So, so that kind of answers a little bit on the comfort and the ambiguity, because you learn and you get better. And then you talked about what is the recipe to be a successful startup system. There is no recipe. There is no system is perfect, right? Uh, like I said, you need to do some research, you need to learn, and you need to keep talking to your partners and collaborators and your team members. And Amy just mentioned it's a flat organization in terms of people. You're hiring the best people you can who bring the minds, and you're putting those minds to work. You don't micromanage them. You give them the leeway and delegate them to make the best decisions, but make sure you guys are partnering and collaborating, not just with your people, with outside logistic companies and providers. And then network and communicate with others who have been in similar situations like us in startups, right? And see what their learning curve was, what they learned, what they would have done differently if they knew, right? So that kind of helps you reduce the time of learning that you have. And find similarities in other industry. It doesn't have to be automotive, it could be non-automotive. Find some similarities and resources to work with for synergies. Like how you can synergize your supply chain, how you can work with somebody else to come and manage to maybe ensure better cube utilization, better delivery methods. And look at digital supply chain technology. Digital supply chain technology, we're going to get more into this as this presentation goes on. But that is critical because that could be a competitive edge the company has going forward. And that's very, very important for us to make sure we implement the right one, and how we nurture it and how we grow it and how we get the buy-in within the organization. That's important. Usually the current offerings traditionals are, so we need to learn to utilize technologies work in a smart, productive, and efficient manner.
Excellent ideas, Govind. These are the words of wisdom with your 20 plus years of experience in logistics. And I'm just so happy to maybe always learn from you. Amy, what do you think? What are your experiences? What are some of the key points from your side? And maybe some of the stories that you have been through in these, like in those trenches when you were there.
Sure.
Tell us about that, please.
What can I share without getting in trouble? So I had directly germane to this, I had the opportunity to go from a very well-developed, very process-driven, well-run organization at Caterpillar into something that was completely new at Tesla. And those environments couldn't have been more different. And it's a perfect example of how you go from having process that guides, that guides your work, and having data that sort of informs what the future should look like or how you would iterate going forward, to having neither. And it's really, the contrast is really very stark. And so having lived that before, I think some takeaways, they echo a lot of what Govind was saying, and that in the absence of process, and I think that, my legal background sort of lends me to this, is what is the future state? Then you fill in the blocks. Like, how do I get there? It's very much a crawl, walk, run iterative process to get from no process, no data, at least on the process front, to an end state and a vision. But then filling that in is the challenge. And that's where you become comfortable with the ambiguity. There's a certain set of hurdles because you don't have these things, and you fill them in by background experience. So, okay, what have you done before? What can you extrapolate upon to sort of fill in process gaps or fill in knowledge gaps? There's also your network, other people that whether in startups or whether in mature organizations. How can they help you? Most professionals are willing, we're all in our network to help each other. There's a lot that can be learned by reaching out. It could be a logistics vendor, it could be a supplier, it could be another OEM professional. There's a lot of opportunity there. And then probably the most difficult challenge is you don't have data, you don't have a data structure, but how do you begin to create it? So that's informed by your cross-functional reach, because it's more than just logistics and supply chain that's going to have to use this data or participate in this data. What does the structure look like? What do the systems begin to look like? And I think those are things that we're going to dive into in some more detail here, but those are probably the three biggest differences between on the journey, I should say, from a very structured environment to becoming comfortable with ambiguity in a startup.
Right. So you're coming from a very structured environment like Caterpillar or Govin coming from FCA, and then you go into this new environment, which is the level of standards are not present, maybe the experiences of people, the level of leadership and the team is maybe not as mature as the previous. But I agree with you on these comments about the collaboration and reaching out to your network. I think is fundamental, Amy. That's a great point that you brought. And then maybe leveraging your previous experiences into this new form, into this new state. So keeping yourself agile, flexible, adaptable. I think this is what I'm hearing from you. And the third point that you talked about is that putting that data structure together to build a foundation. So just maybe a question here, that in your background, Amy, you did a law degree, okay? And how do you, that just popped in my mind right now. So I had to ask you this. How do you ended up in supply chain? What?
In law school, what piqued my interest the most and caught my interest the most was this very archaic body of law, maritime law, which only a few schools in the United States teach in any depth. And I was fortunate to be at one of those, and it just really captured me. And then when I was getting my MBA, there was a role open at Caterpillar in their ocean procurement department, and what a great fit. And the gentleman that hired me also had this interest in this archaic body of law, and we just meshed really well. That's how I sort of accidentally on purpose became part of a logistics team. So
got it. So now, so building on this, Amy, how do you start this? So you are in the startup, and a lot of listeners are in situations where either they're building new companies, they're thinking about startups, they're maybe looking into maybe finding a job at startup. Okay. How do you start this journey? What are the first maybe a few steps in this journey?
If you're looking to join a startup endeavor, I think approach and attitude are probably the two most important things, at least in my mind, as I'm adding people to my team. In the approach, be fearless. So because I think you have to be successful in a startup. So that means cold approach people on LinkedIn from companies that you're interested in. Most of the time you won't get a response, but nothing ventured, nothing gained. And reach out, find the recruiters for that company, reach out to them. But so be fearless, but also have the right attitude. Be comfortable and confident in your own ability, and realize you're not going to know everything, but that can't stop you. So one of the biggest dangers now that I've done this 4 times is we can't move forward because we don't know X, or we don't have a process for that. And you really, in a startup, you can't let that stop you. So you have to use your experience or collaborate with your colleagues to find a way forward. And those are the qualities I'm looking for when I add to my team, is somebody who can think creatively and who is very much a taker of initiative to sort of get things done and not be frozen by missing some of these pieces that we don't have in startups.
Excellent advice, Amy. Govin, digital supply chain. How do you start this digital supply chain program, or what are the first few steps?
Thanks, Norman. I think that was a great explanation from Amy on starting up a team. I think that is key. It's important because as a startup, as you're involved, we are part of technology-driven companies, the companies that are the cutting edge of the technology. We do expect that some of that seeps into how we design our logistic process, how we design a thing. But at the same time, like Amy had mentioned, three pillars: people, process, and technology. Uh, you need to have people who are, first of all, comfortable with data, because we will be data-driven company, mainly a data-driven company, and also have the comfort in seeking out and looking for cutting-edge technologies that are needed. So you need to have people who are willing to take risks, but who are also willing to look at other areas, other industries where they can find common technology that can be utilized or help develop to make this progress. So risk taking, calculated risk taking is important as a part of the team, and you have to nurture that within you. You have to make sure that your people have the responsibility and they can take action, so they're not afraid. First of all, they get comfortable with the data, they are comfortable with technology, and they are willing to take calculated risks. And it's very, very important for them to develop as a team member. And you're absolutely right. And then you have experienced people where we can do a minor correction as needed so that we don't face forward, right? It's important. So, sorry, looks like I got cut off there. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, yes, yes.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, sorry, but I think I got my internet connection is a little unstable. I'm not sure where I left off, where you guys didn't hear me. So, forming a team with that mentality, that's one important. Second thing is digitizing is key in a supply chain, right? Amy talked about, as we try to walk, there are many black box solutions available, but they are not always most ideal. So spend time with the team to map out flowcharts to make sure and agree on what is the most efficient process and stages within which where digitization will have a good make you more efficient. And there is also, we call it logistics smart. So just a small IoT of things and stuff like that you need to have in your supply chain, factory or outside, that kind of help you become more efficient and effective, and also help in communication of processes, methods quicker. So so you have to have the people, you have to have the technology center, and you have to have the process and an iterative process where we can guide our team are necessary in a startup environment.
Got it. Got it. No, thank you. Amy, what are your maybe top 3 points in terms of maybe starting a supply chain journey, digital supply chain journey in a startup? What are your few pointers from your side?
Oh, wow. Be open, I think is the first one. And that applies to a lot of things. As Govind's mentioned a couple times so far, and it's very, very true, you're hiring the best people that you can, but a lot of times people come to a new endeavor with preconceived ideas of what something should look like or how something should work. But be open. What worked before may work again, but it may not be the best, the best solution for your new endeavor. So be open to new ideas, be open to learning. The next, I think, I've mentioned this before, but don't be afraid. You're going to encounter new and novel challenges. Startups are phenomenal learning laboratories. I keep going into startup environments because they're so engaging and they're so enriching, and you learn so much, but it's really scary and it's really hard. So don't be afraid of the new challenges, and take all that learning and apply it. And gosh, third is To echo something else Govind said, don't be afraid to fail. And, in conversations, I've been fortunate to know Govind now for a couple of years. And in previous conversations, he said something that really stuck with me, which is not only fall forward, but if you're not making mistakes and you're not learning from them, you're not pushing enough. So you don't do anything new, or you're not creating anything best in class if you're not making mistakes and learning from them.
Okay. Okay. So Govind, what do you see as the biggest challenges in structuring supply chain at a startup? What are your challenges? What you saw, and maybe in your 2 or 3 different endeavors?
Few things, right? I think I also, like Amy, I used to work in a traditional organization which had standardized processes and methods, and everything was available. And you could go to somebody and ask them for ideas. How does this work? How do I make that happen? And in a startup, you don't have that luxury. That's number one, right? So basically, when you are running a startup logistic organization, you are the person who has everything in his head. But at the same time, like Amy mentioned, you cannot come with any preconceived notions, or you have to make sure that all your team members are open to ideas. But we also want to really encourage them to come up with their ideas that help in us improving and becoming more efficient. It's very important. So it's a give and take and a learning process within an organization. And the challenges in a startup and logistic is we touched about, right? There are usually no systems to start with. You start with something really, really basic and you build on it, right? But you have to really, I would say when Amy had crawl, run, crawl, walk and run, sometimes we have to, from crawl, we got to really run. In startup, that's very, very important for us. Because in a startup, it's not as the logistic is new. Every area of the startup, either take manufacturing, you take the design, you take the packaging area, they're all rookies out there. They're all trying to design things on the fly, right? So key thing is in a startup, you've got to be really, really be flexible in execution, very, very flexible in execution. So your plans, which used to be like 3-year plans or 2-year plan, has to be like a shorter term. You got to break them down into 2 months, 3 months, and 6-month plans. Things that you can achieve in a short term, and quickly judge it, because things around you will be changing. In Tesla, when I went, right, I used to be working in Chrysler. You asked for stories. When I came in Tesla, there were like 6 teams doing the material flow engineering on the floor in different areas, and they were not talking to each other, but they were all had the right intentions and they were all using the right tools, but they were not talking. So what happened sometimes that could create some issues with the launch, or on the timing product launch, or it could create with some kind of a collaboration issue. So you got to be aware of that. You got to make sure that you are in touch with your teams and making sure they're not stepping on each other. You got to make sure they all have their goals, and they are running and executing at a quicker level with your guidance and the team working as a whole, but at the same time not duplicating or having redundancy in work, because usually you have a small team. You have very few people doing things. At the same time, you have to be, logistic is customer service and customer support. And you would know from an engineering standpoint, from a product standpoint, that startup car or vehicle will keep changing. So the process, the logistic packaging process, or your part purchase processes, or something, how you deliver and how you assemble it, you put together to support logistic wide, will change 110 times before you go into production. So you really have to have the flexibility. At the same time, all our startups, the companies that we are in, we are selling sold vehicles. And all our orders are based on real customer demand, not pushed to the dealership. So flexibility comes in place, how you inventorize material, how we get the material just in time. And it requires a strategy to make yourself more flexible, not just from your processes, also from utilization of your factory space, utilization of your suppliers, and how to bring them along and make sure that they also believe in the same strategy and philosophy as you are, to be flexible, execute quickly, and implement technologies that give you, leaps and bounds in terms of efficiency and productivity.
Wow, you're on a roll, Govind. Man, oh man, you are on a roll today.
No, I'm
Oh,
learning
this
from
is like,
See, I'm when you said I'm a 20-year logistic guy, I felt old, so I had to,
yeah, you have to match the expectation. Right. No, this is good. This is actually, I think this is making a lot of sense. And I'm sure that the people who are listening and will listen to this program, they will benefit from this advice as well. Amy, what are your challenges? What keeps you up at night?
Oh, wow. Right now in this startup, it's COVID and its impact on logistics capacity. So we are in our launch year. Our building ramp is upon us. Material is beginning to flow, and the demand or the volume curve is hockey stick shaped. And managing freight flows in COVID is a challenge that keeps me up many times a week. Air capacity for cargo has not even come close to returning to normal. Neither has ocean capacity. There are significant port delays on the West Coast, and all of these things impact our ability to get material in time. And it's in a startup, that's do or die. If you don't build the product, you're in trouble, and you need the material to build. So that's one thing that keeps me up at night. And I think the other thing that keeps me up at night is working for my people, working for my team. Tremendously stressful time when you're starting from scratch. You're building the systems, you're crawling, walking, running, while you're also flying the airplane and building your product. So it's a pressure cooker environment. If like our current team, we're very fortunate and that personalities mesh well. We enjoy working together, and that makes it an enjoyable adventure. But if one part fails or one person, key leader departs the country or the company, that's a big gap and a big loss, and we have to figure out how to manage around that. So making sure that my people have the resources that they need, that they feel valued, and that they're contributing to a bigger mission, is also something that keeps me up at night.
Got it. So you talk about the team and how the team is so important.
Yeah.
What is the leadership style that is required, and how have you adapted to this style or the new leadership style? Do you have to change your leadership style coming from maybe an incumbent organization to a startup, or you just kind of copied the same thing?
For me, they were very different. And my qualifier is that when I was at an incumbent organization like Caterpillar, I wasn't yet a people leader. That was earlier in my career, but I was managed by people. And it was not, this is not negative, but management was a little bit more removed. And you sort of, you managed yourself and your work according to your very well documented SMART goals. And there was a process for everything. As I've come to manage people in a startup environment, I would say that my management style is very different from what I experienced earlier in my career. It's very flat. So my vertical leaders, I have 6 verticals currently. My vertical leaders, we're constantly talking, and it's very informal. It's Slack, it's chat, it's phone calls. It can be at 11 o'clock at night. I'm always available. And we're all available to each other. And it's empathy. It's deploying empathy in your leadership style, because this is challenging. People still have lives, but that's startup. There's the startup challenges, but there's also what kind of culture do you want to build? I think long-term, your productivity is better and you achieve more when your team is engaged. And that comes not just from the adventure of a startup, but also from feeling like you're part of that team. So empathy from a leadership standpoint comes into play to understand your people, know their challenges, listen, and help where you can.
Wow. No. So you see a huge difference moving from Caterpillar to Tesla and to Rivian, and you've adopted to this the leadership style. Govind, what have you seen? What is your experience?
I think you're talking about from a leadership style.
Yes.
Running an organization.
Leadership, team, organizational style. What is the culture and how people are working?
Yeah, I support everything that Amy said. I think that is fantastic. I think what she said from a startup standpoint, all of the above, I would say. What I look for is hire the best you can, and empower them and your team members to make decisions. Yes, you are there. I think the key thing is constant communication with your team members, with your superiors, to make sure that we are still on the right path, right? But you have to empower them, and you have to have them think creatively, um, and then you have to nurture them. You have to make sure that your people are the future leaders. And how do you make them a leader? That is very, very important. Is by not just empowering them, have an empathetic viewpoint, and also ensure that they feel that they are contributing to this value of the company. That's very, very important. And they have a hand in the success of the logistic organization or the company as a whole. And that ensures that they have the skin in the game, and not only that, they feel that they are able to make changes, they are able to bring their ideas and make things better. And I really like what Amy said about the work-life balance that is there. But startup life is crazy. I'm going to be honest with you. It's not like 8 to 5 job, or 9 to 4, or 9 to 5, or 8 to 4, whatever it is. Not. It is like you have to sometime jump on it at 10, 11 o'clock or 2 in the morning, and you may have to work continuously like 60, 70 hours, 80 hours in a week. That is normal. It's because it's a flat organization, everybody able to reach everything, and there are a lot of questions, and there's a lot of suggestions and ideas that you need to. But at the same time, you need to be cognizant of the fact that people have their lives. And you need to make sure as a leader, you have to make sure that your people are, you take care of them, and you make sure that whenever the times are tough, you guys pull together, and whenever there is opportunity to have them and give them the life so they can have something personal, they feel recharged and relaxed, so they can come back and contribute again. That's very, very important. And then allow them to make calculated risks. It's very, very important, and encourage them to do that. And that is very, very essential in a startup environment. And that's how you will develop future leaders, because you need to have somebody in place who takes your place, somebody there who can take your place, right? That's very, very important. And you should never think about just, I'm going to be sitting here in this position all my life, and I'm never going to allow everybody to get promoted or come. No, you got to think you're changing, because as a startup, you're going to grow exponentially, and that's why you need more and more leaders.
Wow, no, this is fantastic. Let me switch to maybe another topic, which is a hot topic for last year, most of the last year, which is the supply chain disruption because of COVID. When the pandemic happened, and the magnitude of the pandemic, so this resiliency and proactively preparing for supply chain disruption. So my question is, how technology can play a part in this, and how have you steered your organizations for resilience or disruption for the future? Amy?
It's a very, very timely topic. One thing, and it actually, it's captured pictorially in the run part of the earlier slide, is some of what we don't have we haven't pulled black box so much, but we're building our own tools to give us visibility to some of these disruptive challenges. So it didn't take long for the pandemic to impact capacity. And while we can't control the capacity, we can control our ability to see disruption. So we've one example right now is we're building a homegrown tool using sort of basic technology and publicly available information. You just have to know where to go get it, where we can see lead times at the ports that we utilize. We can see in-gate and out-gate. We can see how long a vessel is dwelling at berth or out in the channel or out at sea before they can get a berth. We know how long it takes to get a container. We're pulling all of this into a homegrown tool so that we can make very deliberate, very educated decisions about how to route our freight. So if the first port of call on one service string is LA Long Beach and they're having a 10-day delay to ground a container and get it out the gate, is that really where you want your cargo to go? Or do you reach back into the supply chain a bit and you change your routing? So we're starting to build this tool. It's not perfected, and it's very new, but I'm really excited about the prospect of the ability it's going to give us to manage disruption in the future.
Wow, excellent. What about you, Govind?
I think I can't match Amy's example. She's got some great tools and she's working on some how to pull this together. That's a really good example. What I would say is I think we should realize what's happening in automotive industry. It's not just automotive industry, most of industries. The biggest disruption that's happening now is a chip disruption, right? Chip shortages.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to think, why is it happening and how could we mitigate this? So the key thing is in automotive, now we are looking at, if we have disruption, the first thing we see is, oh, we got to hold more inventory, or we have to dual source, or we got to do something else. I think I take the example of what Toyota did in 2011 when they had their earthquake in Japan. And one thing they did very well is they drilled down into their tier ones, tier two, tier threes, and tier fours. And they looked at it was not the most, it was done in a very basic fashion, and they determined what the risk factors are for each of these tiers, and based on that they decided what should be dual source if they are, where they should hold more inventory, or what tier 2, tier 3 inventories they should hold as consigned inventories in their books, to ensure that they have a smooth supply chain that doesn't disrupt everything. But now, as global companies, Rivian, Neo, we are all global companies, and there is risk associated with each of the parts that we procure. So one thing is, I think I would important as to stop to reduce disruption. I won't say stop disruption, especially coronavirus came, that caused disruption in the scale that we have never seen before, right? It was not just industrial disruption. That means the industry just stopped working. It's not that the freight wasn't moving. The industries, people were not working, so you're not producing goods. And it was geographical disruption. It happened because people would not want to share their parts and tools and resources with others because they want to hoard it. And so, then you had some expensive parts stuck in a warehouse. Nobody wants to buy it. And then the parts that you wanted, you could never get it. So it was a different kind of disruption. But what you can do for a normal disruption is you can do some risk mapping, identify a risk point and patterns in supply chain. That's important. Work on mitigation strategy based on the risk presented, cost benefit. Suppose you're getting a part from, let's say, South America, maybe, and that that either it's coming from ocean or something, and it's in a region where there could be transport disruptions. They could have some, social issues or anything that could happen that could cause disruption. Work on saying, okay, how much inventory should I hold for that part? Because I know if they have a disruption or if they have summer rain that causes a flood in a river and it blows out certain bridges and areas, and I need to hold what inventory. And then in some areas, you got to say, okay, I'm getting some cobalt from Congo region, which is a conflict. I may need to have a second source ready if that doesn't work out. And based on that, you have to have a risk mitigation and risk mapping based on continent, location, and the type of critical part. If you're building an electronic module where a chip is all the difference, then you got to make sure that although your tier 1 supplier is putting a module together. You may have interest in making sure you work with the chip supplier and ensure an inventory of a consigned inventory. So there are different strategies you can choose, and you got to make sure you have the right risk mapping and the risk strategy.
Excellent, excellent, Govind. So we have about 9 more minutes. There's a number of questions from the audience. So so let's take a pause here. Let's take a few questions from the audience. Great insights from both Amy and Govind. I really appreciate and a great insightful discussion. I want to highlight just very quickly about this program, the IndustryX program, that the platform that we're talking, this digital supply chain. IndustryX is a center of operational excellence at Wayne State that fosters innovation and acceleration of business excellence with extended network and ecosystem. And the mission is to have a structured innovation ecosystem that leverages partners, that leverages technology and human innovation to maintain the world-class operations that we need. And our key objectives are to promote regional resilience, prosperity, growth, incubate new ideas, workforce development, and number of those things. So a lot of this information is available on our website and our LinkedIn as well. So I just want to take a pause and maybe say a few words about that. But let's come back to the questions. There's a question by Dr. Chinam, part of our program. Thanks, Dr. Chinam. That in the startup environment, there are tremendous uncertainties in terms of volumes and launch timing. Okay, so he's talking about the suppliers. How do you get the suppliers to take you seriously as a startup and work with you? And how do you capacitize your supply chain given tremendous market volume uncertainties and the significant launch timing risk and maybe fluctuations? So Amy, do you want to take this question from the supplier side?
Sure, I can start. I think transparency is really important to building credibility and trust with your supply base. So the volume fluctuations, build timing fluctuations, program and part changes, none of that is new in a startup environment. I would say I think that the industry viewpoint on that we've come to expect that, rather than that be the exception that maybe it was 10 years ago when Tesla was getting off the ground. Anybody working with startup OEMs or EV companies now comes to expect a certain degree of that. But being transparent about your changes and being upfront, like, this is going to happen. This is just the nature of building a new product from scratch. And then to the extent that you can, maybe invite them to peek behind the curtain, because they need to buy into what you're doing in order to support this, because this is not, this carries financial risk for the supplier, reputational risk. So to the extent that you can, invite them to peek behind the curtain, let them see what your vision is, what your product plan is. All these things all contribute pieces to credibility with your supply base. And then you can't violate that. You have to keep them in the loop, even if the news is difficult.
Wow. Okay. No, this is a great advice. Keeping behind the curtain. I will remember this point. I think it's a great point. Govind, what do you think from your side?
I think I agree with what all the stuff that Amy said. It's very, very important. And as a startup, I know we have projections based on the market demand planning, our sales and marketing, and they have demands and stuff. And at the same time, if you look at all our systems, from our product system, from our BOM system, from our manufacturing system, from our logistics, they're all getting primed and they are building. So there will be hiccups. So there are planning volumes that there is most probably it will be hard to hit, difficult to hit in many cases, working longer hours and stuff. And the key thing, like Amy mentioned, is being very, very transparent. Because when purchasing negotiates a certain price with the supplier based on the volume, and they are impacted negatively because all their amortization of their tooling is based on the volume. So it's very important for us as an OEM to be extremely, very, very transparent with them and work with them as partners rather than just purchasing a part and a vendor. And that is important because, and be open to some of their issues and how they can help, how we can help each other, improve better together. And that's important.
Wow. Very, very good, Govind. Let me ask if there are any other questions from the audience. There are a few other questions, but I think what we can do right now is, in the interest of time, we just have a few more questions, a few more minutes left. Customer satisfaction and logistics, real quick, Govind. How do you define customer satisfaction and logistics, and how do you deliver this customer satisfaction logistics?
Thank you. That's a great question. That's a great question. I was drilled into customer satisfaction from my world-class manufacturing days in Fiat Chrysler. And logistic has many, many customers. Engineering is logistic customer, manufacturing is logistic customer, user is a logistic customer, and everybody. So logistic is a provider for everybody. And if you look at the true sense, logistic does not add value to the end product in terms of build, but there are intangibles that logistic does that is not measurable in terms of what logistic brings in terms of efficiency and productivity. Without logistics, you cannot move a part. Without logistic, you cannot, your manufacturing cannot build a part. So customer satisfaction is number one. Logistic gets measured by customer satisfaction. How do we do that? To make sure that you don't shut down your factory. That's one. You got to make sure that your customer always has the part and they can build the car in the smallest footprint they can. It's not that customer has 20 feet of space to build a car and you use 50 feet to store your parts. You can't do that. So it's not only you have to keep your customer building the product, you have to make sure that how you are efficient in getting the part to the customer just in the right customer's hand. So customer doesn't have to walk 50 feet, doesn't have to walk 20 feet. Everything is there. Customer is a surgeon. In a manufacturing environment, I consider the manufacturing operator, assembly operator as a surgeon. That your logistic gives them the part as they need it, so they have minimum movement to get the part. And from a logistic standpoint, how do we get efficient is how do we use our space more effectively and efficiently? Not just the square feet, how we use the cubic feet very efficiently. Grow so you take the minimum footprint you can. That's very, very important. At the same time, how you're coordinating the changes with engineering and manufacturing to make sure you reduce your obsolescence. And how do you make sure your changeover of parts are more perfect and timely? So logistics plays a very important role, and logistic is behind the curtain analogy that this thing used. Logistic does a lot of things behind the curtain. So our job is to make sure not only we are effective and productive and reduce our cost to the overall bill, at the same time, we keep the customer in our forefront.
This is fantastic, Govind. And I wish we have more time. Maybe we have to bring you back and we can do a program on logistics itself with all of your knowledge. Well, Govind, thank you. Thank you very much for coming today. Amy, I know you're very busy and you have a flight to catch also today. So I wish you all the best and thanks for coming and spending some time with us. We look forward to maybe staying in touch and maybe do another program, maybe other aspect of the supply chain.
That would be my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me today.
Thank you. Thank you, Amy. And thank you, Govind. And thank you everyone for joining the program today. We will be posting this, the recording for future use. Stay in touch and we'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.